to get started, but over in the foyer, we'll come on in and get situated. Praise the Lord. I guess the Cornerstone people saw a few raindrops and decided to stay home. Amen. But last night was tremendous. Amen. Because people are just coming in. Anybody here just want to just have something on your heart last night that maybe impacted your heart that you want to just say, hey, wow, this was just, as we say in our C groups, this is my aha moment. Anybody want to share something? For me personally, the questions that we reviewed and some of the information that was there, I was sharing with our speakers that how I read through it, and it was interesting. But as we were sitting there yesterday, and I was asking questions, and Shaunti was answering those questions, just the impact of that really on my own heart was tremendous. I just thought, wow, this is altogether different than anything that I've ever heard, or you didn't want to believe all the bad news, but that's all that we ever heard. But to actually hear that 71% of all people are still married to the same person. So this lie that 50% of all marriages ends in divorce and the statistics in the world is the same as in the church is a total fabrication. There's no research or evidence that backs that up. Yes, sir. Uh-huh.
We encounter in our lives divorce.
Yeah.
And when it was like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's right. And then the divorce rate for second marriages, I'm sure I've repeated it, is much higher than first times. And so really there's a sense of hopelessness that comes out of that. And that was for me, there's always this moment where I said that was worth the whole seminar. And I know there's a whole wealth of stuff that's coming. Amen. That was the introduction. So wow, I'm excited. So if you're watching online, I mean, just get in your car and come. And this is not for couples only. This is something all of us can benefit from, not only from the perspective of our own relationship, but from being able to minister to others and give people hope. And I also encourage you to avail yourself of the product table, the books, and because the material we were talking about last night comes out of the book, the good news about marriage. So you can find that back there on the table. But I'm going to introduce our speakers at this time, and so they're going to come and on the platform and just obey the Holy Spirit and give you what God's given them to give you. But let's all stand up just for a moment of prayer as we open up this first morning session. Father, you have blessed us. Thank you, God, for the gift of your grace, oh God, that's upon Shaunti and Jeff, Lord, as they share with us about marriage. Thank you, Lord, that you impart by your Holy Spirit the strength of your truth into our hearts. God, that is the foundation that it endures every storm. Father, I thank you for that, Lord, in Jesus' name. And God, those that may be struggling in some area of their marriage, I thank you for healing and restoration that comes, Lord, as they just receive your truth today. We thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Okay, guys. These steps are steep. Yes. Sorry about that. Praise the Lord.
Yeah, you guys have some seriously steep steps right here, Yeah.
So, really grateful to be back again. This talk that we're going to be, the first half here is the surprising things that we learned from the happiest couples that we interviewed and surveyed. What are the things that they do that's kind of contributing to their happiness that, the rest of us mere mortals sort of don't get? So we gave this talk, probably several years ago at a marriage retreat in Ohio. And after the talk, we were standing back at the book table, and a gentleman came up to me, and he had a piece of paper folded in half, and he handed it to me, and he walked away. And it said, on the outside that I could see was The Secret to a Happy Marriage. And I kind of opened it up, and it said, when my wife and I were first married, we agreed that she would handle all of the minor decisions that we'd face as a family, and I would handle and decide all of the major decisions. And he said, I can honestly say, after 40 years of marriage, we've never had a major decision. So that is the ultimate secret.
No. No. That wasn't one of the ones that we found that mattered. Okay. Can we move this table
Yeah,
up a little bit? Is that all right?
Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Is that good for you?
That is great. So we're really, first of all, let's just say again, thanks for having us here this weekend. For those of you here and those of you who are watching at home, we're super excited to be able to bring some of the stuff that we've learned over the years. And I'll give you a sense for the next 24 hours or so. This morning, what we're going to do is we are going to have 2 talks and a break in the middle. And in the middle, in that break time, we're actually going to conduct a survey as well. And I know we mentioned that last night during the Q&A time with Pastor. And so I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. But the first talk that we're going to do is really going to set up the rest of the weekend, because it is sort of the most fundamental stuff that we tend not to know matters about what really the habits and the actions that create great relationships. And a lot of these principles are specific to the research was specific to marriage, but candidly, some of these principles really apply to a lot of different relationships. So that's just going to get started, super practical. You'll see how we go on that topic. Then we're going to do the survey, which I'll explain. And it's a very sensitive, there's some sensitive topics, but very, very important for marriages. And we really, really need real average people, at normal couples, rather than 24-year-old or 20-year-old college students that sometimes take part in these studies. So then we'll have a break, and then we will also do a second talk on another topic that we found there's some actions and habits. We're going to take one of the topics from the happy marriages, and we're going to blow it up big. And we're going to really dive into that topic, because we have found it makes this incredible impact on any relationship, not just marriage. Tonight, we will, and I forget what time it is, 6? Okay, I probably should know that. It's 6 o'clock. We are going to have the very interesting talk called Let's Talk About Zippers and Wallets. Because sex and money are 2 of the big issues in marriage, and they are also 2 that we've been studying actually over the last number of years in our most recent research projects, and found some stuff that most of us just don't realize matters so much. There's some serious misunderstandings. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I love it when Shaunti goes through the agenda like this. One time she was doing this, and it was a big church that we were at in South Dakota in February. We like Raleigh better in February than South Dakota in February.
Yes, we do.
And so this church had a lot of kind of either construction going on, so we were going to have to be moving from one venue, from one talk in the morning here in this particular part of the church, and another part when
the fellowship
and so she was
hall
trying to explain to them what we were going to be doing at each section. So she said, here in the main sanctuary, we're going to be doing the talk for women, and then we'll move over to the gymnasium area, and we'll do the for men only stuff, and then we'll go back to the fellowship hall. We'll do sex in the fellowship hall. And the place really came unglued.
I literally, like, you could, I mean, I couldn't have had my face couldn't have been any redder. Let's just put it that way. And somebody actually came up to the pastor. You'll appreciate this. And we overheard them. He comes up to the pastor. He goes, "Wow, pastor, this is a real hands-on marriage conference." Yeah, I haven't lived that down yet. Okay, so anyway, that's tonight. And then tomorrow morning, we'll be at services, and we'll be talking about some of the core things that, how do you want to explain it?
Well, we touched
We
on it
talked
a
on that a
little
little
last
last
night.
night.
The things that we just don't get about our spouse, and we think that they they get us, but we just don't. So we have these mistaken assumptions that we oftentimes operate our marriages around, and it creates opportunities for conflict. Whereas if we can kind of bring ourselves into alignment with a little information, what we'll find is that some of the things that we thought were opportunities for conflict can become opportunities for connection.
So that'll be tomorrow morning at services. So, okay, big picture starting point. I'm going to start off by telling you guys a story that has nothing to do with marriage. Okay, I'm just setting this up. This story comes from a book called Switch, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a book by brothers named Chip and Dan Heath. They're researchers, they're university professors, and they wrote this book on how do you change something. And some of you may have heard of this book. It's actually a really, I think, a very good book. And it's literally like, how do you change a department at work? How do you change your mind? How do you change a marriage? How do you change the way a teenager thinks? Like, there's all these different applications of it. And there was one story that they told as part of a principle that they had discovered really mattered for changing. And so let me tell you this story because it has so much relevance, even though it has nothing to do with marriage. It has relevance for one of the biggest things that we have as an assumption underneath the surface when we encounter difficulties in our marriage. Now, like we talked about last night, most marriages are generally happy most of the time in most cases, but all of us go through periods of up and down, right? And sometimes people in a more of a down period, when it's difficult, it can feel very, sometimes it can feel hopeless. It can feel like we don't know what to do about it. It's a bit overwhelming. So there was a man named Jerry Sternin back in the early 80s. Am I saying this correctly? It was the 80s. Back in the early 80s, he worked for the United Nations, and he worked specifically for the group in the United Nations that was trying to solve a problem that was systemic across Southeast Asia. And in Southeast Asia, there was a systemic issue with childhood malnutrition. And this was a huge issue. Some of you may remember this. There was a lot of news about it. And the United Nations sort of children's group that was trying to do this development, they would go into country after country after country in Southeast Asia trying to solve this systemic childhood malnutrition problem. And it seemed pretty big and overwhelming and hopeless because, I mean, seriously, how do you solve systemic childhood malnutrition in an area with a couple billion people? And you think, okay, to solve childhood malnutrition, we have to solve these big, overwhelming problems. We have to solve poverty. Like, how the heck do you solve poverty, right?
Quickly.
You're like, how do you solve, like, I'm sure that, a lot of the issue is that they didn't have good, clean drinking water. And so we have to build these multi-bazillion dollar water filtration plants. That seems pretty big and overwhelming. Or either, how do you solve corruption? Because there was plenty of aid going into these countries, and it wasn't necessarily reaching the kids, right? And so solving poverty and clean water and corruption, it just seemed overwhelming, and they would go in, they'd throw millions of dollars at it, and the needle wouldn't really move. Like, nothing much was changing. And so this gentleman named Jerry Sternin, they were going into the next country along, which was Vietnam, the country of Vietnam. And he and his team gathered, and he's basically like, this is stupid. Like, we're going to do, and it's kind of the definition of insanity that you hear is attributed to Albert Einstein. We're going to do the same thing again, and we're going to get the same results. We'll do the same thing over and over again and get the same results. And expect different ones, but it's not. It's going to be the same thing. And he said, we're going to go in and do the same thing. The needle isn't going to move. And so he and his team sat down and went, we need to approach this differently, completely differently. Not every child in Vietnam is malnourished. Some of the kids in Vietnam are doing just fine. So instead of spending millions and millions of dollars trying to go in and tackle poverty and whatnot, let's spend a few $100,000 and send just teams of people out into the countryside and try to find all the kids that are well nourished and see if they have anything in common. See if there's anything we can learn. And they did, and they found that they all had one thing in common. He was worried when they started going out and interviewing people, he was worried that they would find that they did have stuff in common, and it was all stuff that you can't replicate, like they were all the rich kids, for example. That wasn't it. They found there was one little easy to miss thing that they had in common, which is that in the morning when the mothers would make the porridge.
The mothers of all kids.
All kids, yep, good point. When the mothers of all the kids would make the porridge or the gruel for the kids in the morning, the classic thing that they would do is they would dip the water out of the river and put it in with the oats or whatever it is. But it was considered low class to have all the stuff floating in the water. There was a lot of stuff in the water. And so they would strain it. They would strain the stuff out and then pour the strained water into the porridge. Well, the mothers of the well-nourished children skipped that step. They took it directly from the river and put it straight in the porridge. And in the process, they didn't strain out all the little vegetation and all the little shrimps in the water. These kids were getting more vegetables and more protein than everybody else. And Jerry Stern and his team realized we don't need to solve poverty and water filtration and corruption. We need to teach the mothers not to strain out the shrimp. And they did, and it solved the problem of systemic childhood malnutrition in Vietnam. Solved it. Now, of course, there are still poorly nourished children in Vietnam, but as a systemic society-wide problem, it solved it. And they then went into the next country and the next country and applied that, and that's why you don't hear anymore about this thing that was a big deal in the 80s of systemic malnutrition. And it was such a simple little thing that had this huge impact. And I read that in that book, Switch, and because we're social researchers who study a lot of things about people and relationships, but especially marriage, we saw this immediate application for marriage. When you have issues, when you're in a down season in marriage, even maybe you're not in a down season, maybe you're just in the middle of arguing with each other this week because there's a lot of stress or whatever, it can sometimes get to be this like insecure, sometimes an overwhelming feeling, especially if it's a difficult season. And you can begin to feel like we're going to have to go through 3 years of psychotherapy to fix this. Like, because you don't know what to do, and stuff that you try may have no impact, and you feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again and getting a different, expecting a different result, and it's not working, and it starts feeling overwhelming. And we thought, it's interesting. When people need hope, and they need to be able to tackle things, they need to be able to look at not just what are all the things that are going wrong, that look like the big problems that need to be solved, but also what are the book Switch and this Jerry Stern story, they talked about finding the bright spots. They talked about finding what are people doing well that's working, what are the role models doing. And we realized that is a huge application for marriage. What are the people who have the happiest marriages doing differently that you may not even know that they're doing?
So this was actually one of the most, I love this research project because as part of us being able to speak around the country, part of our agreement with whenever any church or organization that brought us in
For about
for about
3 years.
for about
maybe.
3 years
Yeah.
was you had to the host had to identify 3 or 4 couples in their congregation that they viewed as the happiest, most stable marriages and allow us to interview them for 45 minutes each. And so that's what we would do. We would sit down with these couples for 45 minutes and ask them some questions and just let them talk. And what we found is of these happy couples, most of them didn't know why they were happy. I would say, so what do you attribute kind of your happiness to? And almost every couple to a person
Almost everybody, yeah.
said, we've learned to communicate well. And I went, great, what's that mean? And they went, we communicate well. And I went, okay, can you
What
describe?
do you do? What does that mean?
Well, we communicate well. And they didn't know. And so as we would just be sitting there listening to them talk, what we began to find over the year and a half or so was that they used different words to describe things, but we began to see patterns that many of them would have in common. And it was so fascinating because then we were able to kind of take those things that we thought were patterns and then put them into a national survey of couples. And you can talk about that if you'd like, and then it ultimately teased out how many?
12. 12 things that apparently happy couples do differently from everybody else that they don't even know they're doing half the time. Don't even know that it's a big deal. Like the mothers not realizing what a big deal it was that they weren't straining out the shrimp. And it's a huge impact for a little bit of change and a little bit of awareness. We basically, one of the things that we realized is that whenever we have marriage issues, it's really easy to okay, you do counseling for your marriage issues. And this is great. Like, I don't have any problem with this at all. I think that this is awesome. You sit down with a counselor, you try to dig out what the issues are, the problems, in order to surface them and tackle them and fix them, which is great. Like, that works. That's great. But that can't be all you do, because then you're only focusing on the problems. Right? And there's also wonderful stuff to focus on, like the things that you are doing that's really working and you don't really realize.
And do more of that.
And do more of that. I mean, think of it. For us as followers of Jesus, if we want to look like Jesus, we study Jesus. We don't study the Pharisees. Right? And so what are those things? And so that was what we basically tackled. We were worried, just like, I'll be candid, just like Jerry Sternin was worried he was going to find stuff that couldn't be replicated, like that the well-nourished kids were all the kids of the rich families. We were kind of worried at the beginning that we would find stuff that couldn't be replicated, like, that the happiest couples all came from intact families. It doesn't help anybody to say, oh, I'm so sorry, your parents shouldn't have gotten divorced, right? But thankfully, that's not what we found. We found all of these little things that really matter. So the big survey that we did for the Happy Marriages study, which is what we're talking about, it took us about 3 years to do this whole thing, big national study. And I'm going to share what those, probably 4 or 5 of the 12, we're not going to be able to get through all of them. And then we will take one of them and blow it up big in the second talk.
That's great.
Okay. So should I just jump in?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about how you determined the happiest couples or later?
Oh, yeah, I know, because I know some people are probably going to ask. It's
Okay.
a great point. So we always get a question of how did you determine who was the happy couples in order to sort of figure this out. So on the survey, we had a question. And I realized I can't explain this because it'll influence the survey we're about to do. I just realized that.
Okay. We'll explain it after you take the
After you
survey.
guys take the survey.
But trust us, it's good.
We had a methodology behind how we determined the happiest couples, and I can't explain it to you because it would impact the survey that you guys are about to help with. So, but after that, I promise. And once we close the survey out, because we're going to do it during that period of time only, and then close the survey, then I can explain it. Okay. So let's go into the secrets. The first secret. Now, by the way, the secrets of the happiest couples. One of the things that was overwhelmingly encouraging is that 11 of the 12 secrets worked if only one person in the couple did them. If only, like literally, you can drastically change your marriage just by you doing it and the other person doing literally nothing of this.
And also another thing is, it was unusual, if I would say, that the happiest couples did all 12 of these.
Oh, yeah.
Consistently.
No.
So don't
Yeah.
think that it's 12 or nothing. I mean, sometimes it's easiest to find one that you think you can do and do it well.
Yep.
And then build off of that. Don't try to boil
Tackle
the
all of
ocean,
them.
so to speak.
Yeah. And by the way, feel free. I don't know if you guys have a pen with you. I don't know if you want to take notes on your phone. I don't know if you have a way to write down anything. Feel free to take notes if you're a note taker. Because some of this stuff, it's really easy to go, now, what was that? You know, I can't really remember. So feel free, if you're a note person, to tackle these in your notes. Okay. First of the 12 secrets of the happiest couples, and this is the only one of the 12 that's a prerequisite. It is very, very difficult to have a happy marriage without doing this one. This is the only one that we're going to say that about. And that is that the happiest couples choose to believe the best of their spouse's intentions towards them, even when they're legitimately hurt. Let me say that again, because some of you are like, what? Okay. The happiest couples we found, they choose, the different partners choose to believe the best of their spouse's intentions and motivations towards them, even when they've been legitimately hurt. Everybody gets hurt. Even in the happiest couples, you hurt each other's feelings, things go wrong. The problem is that our natural tendency, the human nature that all of us have, the natural first inclination is to go, gosh, you know, he said this thing that hurt my feelings. He knew how that would make me feel, and he said it anyway, right? Like that's a natural feeling. Or, you know, maybe from a guy's perspective, it's, you know, the guy's feeling that, you know, ow, like nothing I do is ever good enough for her, right? Like whatever those feelings are, those feelings come up in our human selves. And yet the happiest couples, it was fascinating to watch that either on purpose or because they'd practiced it so much it became automatic, there was this stopping point, and they had the same ow, and then there was a no, I know he loves me. I know she appreciates me. And so they must not have known how this would make me feel, or they wouldn't have said it. They wouldn't have done it, because I know they care about me. And that one switch of believing the best of your spouse's intentions towards you is absolutely huge to be able to navigate all the ups and downs. Even this morning in the lobby, I was talking to one of the women who's here, and she was telling me that in previous years in her relationship, it would be very, very easy to assume, like we talked about last night, to assume that, well, of course you know that this hurts my feelings, and that's why you said it, right? Like you're doing this on purpose because you're trying to make me crazy, as I think you said last night. Maybe. And we all have that tendency, and we have to fight it, because here's the truth. we were so encouraged to find out that the choice to believe the best of our spouse's intentions, that choice is almost never, now I wish I could say it was 100% of the time, it's not 100% of the time, but almost 100% of the time is not wishful thinking. Even in the relationships that were in the most difficult, dark state of affairs, the vast majority, it was like 99.26 something percent, it was almost 100% of people deeply cared about their spouse. They wanted the best for them. They wanted them to be happy. They cared about them. Even in the really, really difficult marriages, they care about each other. You cannot have a happy marriage if you refuse to believe that. You have to believe that your spouse cares about you, because it is the truth. I think we worked it out, and it was like, if you had a stadium you'd have to have a stadium with 1,260 people in order to find one that had one person who didn't care about their spouse. That's how overwhelming this was.
And you know, as Shaunti said earlier, these things can work even if it's just one person in the couple choosing to apply them. While we were doing the research on this, I stumbled across a study that was called The Power of Good Intentions. And it was a study conducted by a professor at the University of Maryland, I believe.
Yeah.
And conducted with college students. And I got to tell you, we kind of laugh at college students at some
And we're
point.
glad that, they're willing.
Yeah, I'm grateful that for $20, college students will generally subject themselves to anything. And that's really helpful for the rest of us. So in this particular study, what happened was they would take these subjects and they would sit them at a table, and they hooked up all sorts of kind of biometric measuring devices to them to measure all sorts of physiological responses that they would have. And they also connected them to what was a cable that was leading to a partition. And on the other side of the partition was a little device with a red button that when the red button was pushed, it would administer an electric shock to the person sitting there, and then they would capture all the responses, physiological responses. Now,
Painful,
and it
shock.
really did hurt. And what the study was conducted to prove was that the subjects were told one of three things about the person on the other side of the partition. And they did this with lots and lots of students. In one case, they were told that the person on the other side of the curtain or partition knows that pushing that button is going to give you a shock, but they've also been told that it will help you win money. Okay? And then the next group, they were told that the person on the other side is hitting the button accidentally and didn't realize that it was administering a shock. And then on the third group, they were told that yes, the person knows that it's administering a response or a shock and thinks that's kind of cool. It doesn't really care that it hurts. So that's what they were told. And so they did this, and they measured the responses, the physiological responses. For the group that thought that the person was doing it on purpose and didn't care, it hurt a lot, and it registered that it hurt a lot. If they thought it was done on accident, it hurt less and registered as hurting less. Physiologically different. And if they thought the person doing it had their best intentions and best interests at heart, it hurt dramatically less.
Same shock.
It was the same shock, but only thing that changed was in the subject what they perceived of the intentions of the party beyond the curtain. And so for us, one person, if you will choose to believe that about your spouse, those things that otherwise could hurt and did hurt a lot in years past or months past can hurt a lot less.
Should we give them an example of the foodie couple? Do we have time
Yes,
to tell?
I love that.
Do I
Please,
have time
yes,
to tell that story?
please do, because
Okay.
it's very
We
important?
well, we need examples. At least I need examples in order to know how
if
to
it's
apply it.
okay, maybe if we could borrow 10 minutes from the other session, if that's the case, because this
Sure.
stuff I think is highly, highly critical. And so is it okay if we're a little flexible on break and all that sort of stuff?
Cool.
We'll end at the right time, but as far as,
Cool.
Okay.
All right. So this is an example of how do you do this? What does this look like? So here's one of the stories that we heard from one of the happiest couples. And it was by the way, when we do these interviews and whatever, sometimes we're talking to the couple, sometimes we're talking to just the spouse because I'm talking to somebody at an airport or something, because I do a lot of random interviews. And so that was the case. I was just talking to this one woman, and she told us a story of how she and her husband lived in, and it was kind of an area like this one where it's on the outskirts of a more populated area, and it was an area that was outside a larger city, and they were both foodies, both the husband and wife. They had gotten married and lived in Manhattan or somewhere where there's just tons of great restaurants, and they just were those kinds of people that loved that. That was their thing. And then they moved out to a smaller area, and there just weren't as many of those options for the really, really high-end good restaurants that they enjoyed. And then they see that there's going to be a restaurant coming into their area that's got this big name chef, and they're all excited. And at this time, they're pregnant with their first child. She's pregnant with their first child. And so as this restaurant is going up, they're going, you know what? Let's get on the list, because you have to get on the list for the first couple months are booked up with this famous 5-star chef. So we'll get on the list for a reservation, and that'll be our last big date before the baby comes and our lives change forever. And so they get on the reservation for when the restaurant's going to open, right? A few weeks before her due date. And as the restaurant is being built, as they're driving by, it was like a thing for them. They're like, 2 more months, 3 more weeks, 4 more days. They're all excited. And then the night of the big date comes, and her husband takes a client call at 6 o'clock and misses the reservation.
I mean, that's painful. I mean,
We sometimes see the men in the crowd when I tell that story. You see the men go, oh,
dang.
like, oh,
How do you crawl out from that one?
So, well, that's what the example to me was so interesting, because she, as you can imagine, was so upset. And when I said, what's going through your mind? Now remember, this is one of the happiest couples, right? What's going through your mind? And she's like, instantly, my mind starts spiraling into all of these things. Like, is this what our life is going to be now that I have a baby that I'm going to be, dealing with, that he's going to be working all hours, and he cares more about work than about me and the baby, and I'm going to be a single mom, and woo, your brain goes all these different directions. And she said she was so upset that he didn't care, blah, 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 blah. And then she stopped herself. It was that, no. He was just excited as I was. He was saying 4 more days, too. So there must be another explanation for this behavior. Write that down if you're taking notes. There must be another explanation.
Because he loves me.
Because he cares about me. He loves me. It's not, the answer isn't that he doesn't care. That's where my brain goes, but the answer isn't that he doesn't care. So there's another answer. And so when he runs in after having missed the reservation, and there's nothing they can do about it at this point, the place is completely booked for the next 2 months, and she's due in like 2 or 3 weeks. So when he comes running in, he's all flustered and he's upset. She's already worked through this in her head. so that instead of unloading on him, which is what she initially was going to do, she's able to say, I'm so disappointed, because, you have to be able to say, I'm so disappointed, right? What happened? So she's assuming there's a reason, there's some reason that this happened. And she said you could see that he was initially really defensive and he was like ready to fight, and she said she saw all of that defensiveness just drop because of the way she approached it. And he was able to explain that at 6 o'clock, he was getting ready to leave, and his phone rings with a client, on the display that you could see it was this big client. And he turned his head, and his boss is standing just a few feet behind him. And he's like, I felt like I couldn't not take that call. Like, I've got a wife and a baby on the way. I can't be on any question mark list. Now, you can argue, maybe you could have taken the call and said, I'll call you back on my cell phone. Like, maybe there was a different way of handling this. You could question his methods. You could question some of the decisions that he made. But the point is that his intentions were good, not bad. The motivation was good, not bad. And that's the kind of thing that preserves your happiness as a couple rather than letting it be eaten away at.
Yeah, so she was disappointed, but she chose to believe that the person on the other side of the curtain was doing it for her best interest.
That it wasn't that he didn't care.
It wasn't that he didn't care.
Okay, next topic.
Which, can we do that one?
Yes.
Okay. This one is, honestly, it's small, and it might seem somewhat frivolous.
Silly.
But we found it, I love it, because typically it goes against marriage advice that I have given, that
For
other people
pastors
have given to us.
We'll apologize in advance if we're like blowing up any classic marriage and premarital advice that you've given people. You guys and Pastor Dwayne, we just apologize in advance.
So what we would do in those interviews with all those happy couples, as we would be talking to them, we'd say, what is one bit of advice that you would say that you would give to a couple that's thinking about getting married, to anyone that you
Who
would
wants
say,
to be happy.
Who wants to be happy? What would they say?
They would always, we had 1,000 couples in our study group, and always they would say, oh, it's really important to not go to bed mad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ephesians 4:26.
Yeah, and then you
Don't
would
let
ask,
the sun go down in your anger.
Did you let it go there?
I didn't.
What did you do?
I'm really bad, you guys. I couldn't help myself. It was so fun. I always said, when they said it's really important to not go to bed mad, I would always go, oh, absolutely. I totally agree. So do you ever go to bed mad? Well, it's a really important principle. We were telling John and Carolyn the other day. I'm like, no, I know that it's an important principle. That's not what I'm saying. I get it. But that's not what I'm actually asking you, Mr. and Mrs. Happy Couple. What I want to know is, do you go to bed mad? You're saying not to, but do you? And it was hilarious because out of the 1,000 couples in our study group, we found 3 who said that, no, I never go to bed mad. Everybody else, they kind of go, well, yeah, kind of sometimes. And when we asked, help us understand, what does that mean? You're saying it's important, which we agree. It's an important concept. It's an important principle. But what they said in practice was fascinating. These happy couples pointed out something that I think every one of us knows, which is that in practice, when you've gotten to the point where you've got 2 exhausted, angry, upset people trying to duke it out at 1 a.m, nothing good is going to come from that point on, right? And that these couples actually had learned that in practice, sometimes you have to actually just say time out and let's sleep on it. And the next morning, here's what we found, is that it actually, statistically, the differences between the happiest couples and everybody else, it turns out to be was what happened the next morning, not the night before. Because what a lot of people found, and we've all seen this, is that sometimes
A good night's sleep works wonders in many cases. I mean, it's kind of like, what were we fighting about anyway? Like, why was that such a big deal? It seemed huge at 11 p.m. or 12 or 1 a.m. But, at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's kind of like,
what was that about? Yeah. But here's the thing that was interesting. If the issue was still there the next morning, if there were still emotions around it, the happiest couples didn't let it go. They dealt with it. And everybody else was more inclined to kind of let it float away and hope that it kind of went away and not deal with it. And so that was really interesting, that was the big difference. Now, I have to say I was a little... what's the right way of putting it? I was a little...
apprehensive about this result. I mean, it didn't... Because over all of the research and the surveys and the data, what we have always found is that it dovetails with what Scripture says of how we should live our lives. Truth is truth. I mean, it just is. God knows us, and He wrote about us in this Word and how to live our lives. And now if all of a sudden it kind of goes against something in Scripture, it doesn't matter what the happiest couples do. We can't advocate that. I mean, if it's contrary to Scripture, and I mean, it was a real challenge. And
it was a real challenge also because I was thinking, how can it be true if it's contrary to Scripture?
Exactly.
That doesn't work.
And so, as Shaunti alluded, you know the Scripture. It's Ephesians 4:26. Be angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down, in the King James Version, on your wrath or on your anger. And so, you guys have seen already now, Shaunti is a student. She wants to learn and understand things, and she's also a student of Scripture. And she, in our marriage, up to this kind of point, I mean, if we were having a disagreement in the evening, she would wear me out because she'd say, we have to resolve this tonight.
Come on.
Because we can't expect God's favor on our marriage if we are going to do something contrary to the Word.
And we have to solve it before we go to bed. We can't go to bed mad.
And at that point, I would fall back into lawyer mode, and I'd say, listen, we didn't start this fight until the sun was already down. So I've got 24 hours before we have to fix it. I'm going to bed. Yeah. It worked for me, not so much for her. So
yeah, we worked through that a little bit. But the point, as we started learning this stuff, really was kind of the same thing. It was like, but how can this be true if it goes against Scripture? And really, as Jeff said, I was wrestling with this, and I was telling a pastor at one of our speaking engagements, I was like, really wrestling with this. I don't know how to resolve it. And he kind of laughed. He's like, let me show you something. And so he actually goes to his, instead of on his phone, he actually goes to a paper Bible to Ephesians 4:26. In your anger, don't sin. Don't let the sun go down in your anger. And he's, obviously this is Paul speaking to a group of people about community. This isn't even, by the way, about marriage. It's about living together in community. But be that as it may, the pastor says, look at the asterisk, and you can see this if you go to your Bible. On Ephesians 4:26, it has a little caret that says this is actually Paul quoting a verse from the Old Testament. And his audience would have been very familiar with this, right? So you look at that, and what's the verse that Paul is quoting? It's Psalm 4:4. You can go look it up. What does Psalm 4:4 say? In your anger, do not sin. Think about it overnight and remain silent. The baby agrees.
It's perfect. Perfect for those of us who can't think quickly and figure out what we're going to say. I need to sleep on it. I need to meditate on it, as it says, Psalm 4:4. Meditate
somebody, there you
within
go.
your heart, on
Thank
your
you.
bed, and be still. I love that.
So the key,
Okay.
is that, as that pastor told us at the time, the key appears to be, in your anger, don't sin. If you need to duke it out at 1 a.m. to not sin in your anger with your spouse, do that. If you need to think about it overnight and remain silent so you don't say something that you were going to regret the next morning, do that. The key is, don't sin in your anger. And that includes, by the way, do you mind telling the husbands the one thing that I think is important?
So we're going to hopefully have a little time tomorrow. It might be tough.
I don't know how much time we're going to have on this one.
Okay, so should I just jump into a little bit?
I would just explain the to-do.
Here's what we found is that, briefly, is that men's and women's brains tend to operate a little differently when dealing with thoughts and emotions.
Especially negative ones.
Feelings. For us guys, oftentimes we do something that when there's a kind of negative thought or a negative feeling or an experience, we kind of click the X and make it go away. And that's what we do. And so we tell our wives oftentimes, it says, honey, just don't think about it. It's that easy. Just don't think about it. And she's going, what do you mean? Because of the way that God has wired a woman's brain.
We can't just click the X on something that's bothering us
and make it go away. Just can't. And so for you as guys to know that you may be able to just not think about it and go to sleep. Your wife may be lying there counting ceiling tiles for the next 8 hours.
Worrying.
And is this? And so as we are to love our wives as Christ loved the church, recognize that difference. Recognize that they're different from us, and therefore seek to help her, reassure her that, okay, we're at odds right now, but we'll get through this. It'll be okay, but let's just sleep on it. I want you to know we're going to be okay.
We'll tackle it in the morning, I promise, and we'll be okay. It just makes a huge difference. That's an example of, if you are, and it may not be husbands and wives, right? Like sometimes men and women are flipped on this. Maybe the husband is the one that needs that.
Correct.
But whoever it does, be angry and don't sin. And if your spouse needs that reassurance before you go to bed, give it. Okay. Next topic. Okay, so this, by the way, this topic is the one, we're going to tackle it for a few minutes now, and then we're going to actually blow it up in talk number 2. So I'm going to tell you and give you an example of a story that we heard. This is the kind of thing that we heard from the couples when we would ask them questions and such. And Jeff, we always loved asking this one question.
Take us through your last fight, because that fight may have been a year ago, it may have been a week ago, but darn it, it tends to stir things back up with some people. And so if we can see them getting agitated as they're reliving
These are the
thing,
happiest
and
couples.
oftentimes then we leave, and let them
deal with it.
But it really is great data and information.
It was great data. I hate to say it, it was kind of funny, but we ended up, when we would ask them, take us through your last conflict, we would hear a story like this one. And I'm going to tell you what this guy told me. And at the end of what he told me, I want you to diagnose what he was doing that was maybe resulting in them being a happy marriage. So this gentleman told us a story of where he had been, I guess, for several months, had been working on this huge deal at work. I can't remember what he was, a management consultant or lawyer or something, but he had been working on this big deal at work and had been leading up to these, he'd been putting in 80, 100-hour weeks, and then on this one Thursday morning, he was going to get on a plane early and fly away to close this deal. And on the Wednesday, he called his wife 3 times. She was a stay-at-home mom, 3 little kids, and needed her to go to the dry cleaners because every single one of his shirts was at the dry cleaners. This, of course, was back in the day when we actually went into offices and needed shirts to go with your suits or whatever. But literally 100% of his shirts were at the dry cleaners. And so he was really worried. She's busy. She's got 3 little kids. And so he called her and he's like, I'll go to the dry cleaners if I need to. Like, I can go on my lunch hour. He tried 3 times. And each time he called her, she said, no, I got it. I'll go, I promise. So he comes home 9 o'clock at night to find out that the dry cleaner is closed and she's forgotten to get the shirts. And he,
I heard that gasp. That's the same gasp that us guys felt when the guy blew the dinner reservation.
It was like,
It's like, oh no, what happened?
What happened? And I asked this man, I said, so what did you do? And he was like, I was so upset. I'm like, well, tell me, what were you thinking? And he said, I was thinking she doesn't appreciate the fact that I've been working these 80, 100-hour weeks for 2 months. I'm exhausted. And she's not thinking about me, and I'm so upset. And he says, I go stomping downstairs. He's like, I couldn't even talk to her because I would have said something I would have regretted. And he said, I went stomping downstairs to my workshop, and he was a woodworker, I guess, as like a hobby. And so he's like, I'm downstairs with my rubber mallet, pounding pieces of wood together. And I said, what are you thinking? And he goes on this long trail of thought. And he said, I started thinking that she didn't care and blah, 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 and she does this all the time, and I called her 3 times. But that's not really fair because, she had the kids and they were sick. And he goes on this sort of explanation of how, as he's pounding the wood together, he's like, that's not really fair because the kids had to go to this doctor and that doctor, and the wife had to go stand in line at this pharmacy and that pharmacy, and then she went and got dinner, and she went to the grocery, had to go to the grocery store and get dinner, and she always cooks dinner for me. Like, it doesn't matter how late I get back from the office, she's always got dinner ready. And she's always so generous that way. And she's such a good wife. And why am I being such a jerk? Now, what did he do? Diagnose what just happened. Shout it out if you have a guess. Somebody say it. Her intentions were good. What was it that he actually did during this process while he was thinking and talking to himself? He chose to believe the best. He remembered who she was and what she did. He talked himself out of being mad. How did he talk himself out of being mad? By changing his focus from the negative thing that was real. Like, this was real. Like, it was legit that he was upset. And he talked himself into remembering the things that were good that she did, and his intention and her intentions towards him, and the things that were positive and excellent and worthy of praise. Philippians 4:8. We'll talk about that more in a minute. He talked himself out of being mad. It's interesting that one of the biggest, most obvious differences between the happiest couples and everybody else is, I'll give you a quote from one of these couples. One woman said, "My feelings used to boss me around. If you want a happy marriage, you have to learn to boss your feelings around." We think that our feelings just are what they are. We can change our actions, but this is just how I feel. This is just me. This is just how it works. And we don't think we can change our feelings. And it turns out the happiest couples have found that is absolutely not true. You can absolutely 100% change how you feel about your spouse by changing your thoughts and changing your actions towards them. And one of the main thoughts is by switching your focus to what's good. What, as Philippians 4:8 puts it, what are the things that are excellent about them? What's lovely? What's noble? What's worthy of praise? rather than what's worthy of driving you crazy. And that's something we're going to talk about a lot more in session number 2. Did you want to explain our own personal example of this? Do you want me to set it up?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Okay. So Jeff and I, we had in our first 10 years-ish
Yeah.
of marriage, we had a good marriage. Not, it wasn't
good.
one of the happiest happy
But
marriages.
it had its ups and downs.
Yeah, but it was good. Like, it was generally happy. And we generally enjoyed being married, but we had plenty of nights where, like, one of us would sleep in the guest room because I can't sleep next to somebody who doesn't care about me. Okay.
And Shaunti felt that way sometimes too.
Anywho, when we were in the middle of this research project, suddenly we realized, wait, we're at that, like, top level of happiness in this marriage, and why? Like, what happened? What changed? And we traced it back to something that had happened several years before, when I turned 39 years old, just a couple of years ago. When I turned 39 years old, I didn't know that this was happening, but it turns out that this was the pivot point that completely changed the trajectory of our marriage. And it was because Jeff, like, ended up with this incredible birthday gift.
I wanted to
idea.
make her 40th birthday something memorable. So I got into my mind that I was going to write her a book of her 39th year, which was going to be a journal of every day of her 39th year, of our life together, the kids, our interactions, all of these
Like, just
things.
sort of what was happening.
What
that
was
day,
happening
basically.
and my thoughts, my inner thoughts on these things. And I would then get it bound and put into a book and, give it to her on the birthday. Now, let me just say out there, because I can tell every guy out there is going, I hate this man. He is now telling my wife something that he did. I stink at giving gifts. I mean, I am telling you, I am the worst gift giver on the planet.
That's not untrue.
Example. When she was pregnant with our first child, our daughter, at Christmas time, I gave her a pregnancy workout video. That's kind of typical of my gift choosing. So this one was an anomaly. This was an outlier.
I really appreciated it because, I didn't know about it until I turned 40, that every single day he had journaled, like every single day, It was amazing.
So what would happen is at the end of every day, I would go down to my home office and sit at my computer, and I would write out these thoughts and entries under that particular day. And there were times when, I got to tell you, when we weren't together on, emotionally and everything, and I was upset. And I wanted this book to reflect my innermost thoughts and feelings. So I'm hammering away at the keys and writing, and these things. And as I'm doing that, after several times of this, I'm starting to think, you know what? Our kids might read this, years and years from now, and they'll go, Dad, you were pretty harsh, or what
were such a jerk.
It was kind of thing. So I thought, let me have a kind of, I want to be honest and write that and record that, but let me have another narrative that goes along with
like
it.
a paragraph number 2.
A paragraph after, my thoughts. And it would be like, and so I started writing, but I'm always remembering or reminded of what you do. And I would go through my list of things that Shaunti does so well, that makes our life joyful and makes my life easy. Things that I oftentimes just take for granted and don't think about. I just assume that they're there. I forced myself to think of those things and write them down. And it just became kind of a practice. And what would happen is I would find myself, after I'm done recording my feelings, that I would be able to go up to bed relaxed, all of those angry feelings, those emotions were gone. And so I was a pleasant person to come up to bed. And that's just kind of what I did. And that went through the year. And without
had
my
no idea.
knowing it, it became a habit. And it changed what I would feel about Shaunti.
Well, you actually said one of the things that he said once we diagnosed this, a few years later, that this is what had happened. He said, I realized that even in the middle of we'd be starting an argument, and after a few weeks of this habit, in the middle of me starting to get upset at you, I'd be thinking about what I'd be having to type later, and thinking at that moment of, but you do so many good things here, and starting to turn those thoughts. And he's like, even in the middle of something that would have made me crazy before, it stopped making me crazy.
And my very favorite, and it's consistent, I didn't realize it, but it's consistent with my favorite verse in all of Scripture is Psalm 103:2. And Psalm 103:2 says, praise the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. And I gotta tell you, that has always stuck with me, in that there are times when you are disappointed with your life, maybe disappointed with God or discouraged. What we have to do, and what the psalmist did there, was he would recount all of those stories and memories of God's faithfulness and deliverance in his life. And so that's what I would do in my life. That's what I've chosen to do as I would face things. And I realized that doing that with my spouse is the same thing. And it really is transformational in your relationship. Because when it comes down to it, we kind of oftentimes think, well, what's in it for me? Peace. That is a great thing. Your spouse may not necessarily change their habits or behaviors, but how you view them, and then view the other things that your spouse does that we all so take for granted at times. For example, and I'll go real quick, Shaunti, in addition to being a student of things, is perhaps the most mentally organized person I've ever met in my life. She can carry so much stuff in her brain and has it all in a filing system and where it goes. She's just so handy to have around, because I don't have to track calendars or anything. She's got everything. And it's just amazing. Physical organization, however,
it's not my giftedness.
Yeah. So what in our marriage, many times, it would be like, how can you not see the clothes there? How can the dishes, and I tend to be someone who everything has a place, and a place for everything. I like order. I like neat. And that wasn't kind of part of our marriage. And it caused tremendous opportunities for friction. And, how can you not know that? And she would say, it's kind of like elevator music. It's
background
there,
noise.
You just don't notice it. It's there, and it's just the way it is. And so I couldn't believe that you cannot notice this. And it wasn't until in this practice that one day, coming home, toys from the kids everywhere, dishes, and the place looked a bit chaotic. And I realized, you know what? Those toys there that are strewn everywhere are evidence that I have two amazing kids that think I'm pretty darn cool. Those dishes that are just piled up on the counter is evidence that Shaunti's in my life. And she's here, and she loves me. I could have had and I did, a perfectly ordered, neat apartment and been alone. Now those things that had provided such a moment of anxiety and discomfort for me were evidence of something that God had done amazingly in my life. And so I chose to view them that way. And it's made tons of difference for me. And it's just changed me. And she has, because she's seen that change in me, she works to make those other things. And she does. And it's just, it all feeds into one another.
It is essentially the key takeaway here is to recognize that God has given us, and he talks about it so often in ways that we just don't see in his word. He's given us the prescription, given us the recipe for how to actually transform our feelings to gratitude for our spouse, and that will change everything. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next topic. So maybe one more,
okay.
And then I think we need to give them a break and come back. Okay, and do the
maybe 5 minutes on this one.
Just briefly. Well, okay, let me just mention this one other one because we talked about it last night during the Q&A. The other secret, one of the other secrets of the happiest couples, is that they treated each other first and foremost like best friends. Okay. And we talked about that a little bit when we did the question and answer session last night, but let me just sort of put a point on it. Did you want to tell them about the study?
Sure. So when we used to live in New York, our pastor, Tim Keller, don't know if any of you ever heard that name. He's just a tremendous Bible teacher. And he was in one of his messages was saying that, he said, it does, and he was talking about a study on best friends. What are the factors that make for individuals to be best friends?
Well, just close friends
in general. And so for most of us, and you think about it, what are the things that cause two people to become close friends? And you'd think things like, well, you have kind of common interests. You do things, those common interests. You have similar temperaments. You're both kind of, I don't know, extroverts or introverts or laid back, whatever it is. Or what were some of the others?
I mean, tons of others. You've shared values. Whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all of those are good, but they pale in comparison to the number one reason that the researchers have found as to why individuals become and stay best friends. And you know what that is?
Geographic proximity. You're the best friends with the people you see the most often and you spend the most time with. And we all know that's true, right? Because we've all have had really close friends where one of us moved away or, we just don't see each other as often.
And you're still good friends.
Yeah, you still love each other. You're still close, but it's not that intimacy. It's not the awareness of what's going on with everything. And that's what we found with these happiest couples is they primarily treated each other like best friends. And one of the predictors of that was they just hung out with each other. They just spent time together. And that's actually something that seems so simple, and yet it is such a big deal because when we start becoming at odds with each other, we often try to almost avoid time together because we don't want the conflict. Right? Like we try to avoid being together so that we don't have that feeling. And yet that makes us go further and further and further apart. We did an event in Corpus Christi, Texas, in the middle of the research project for this book. And in the middle of this Happy Marriages research project, there was a counseling center that brought us in that served the entire southern half of the state of Texas. So you can imagine, like a big counseling center. They had offices all over the place. And the lady who was in charge of the counseling services at this massive counseling center, everybody came from all over to go to this place because they had this massive success rate in saving broken marriages. Very, very few people ended up getting divorced if they went into counseling with her or with her people in her system. And when I said, tell us, what is it? And she said, it's stupidly simple. I'll tell you what we do. We don't have any magic wand. This is a Christian counseling center. We use all the same biblical principles that every other counselor does, but there's one difference. She said, before I will take a couple into counseling with me, before I will do their first real session together, I require one thing, and that is for 2 weeks, I say, you have to spend every day, the next 2 weeks, you have to find half an hour where you can just hang out together and just talk and just be friends again, and with no negativity, no fighting, for half an hour. Like, you can set your watch if you want, set a timer for 30 minutes, and at the end of it, you can start fighting again if you wanted to. But 30 minutes just hanging out as friends again. And she said, it is astounding what happens by the time they come in 2 weeks later for their first session, they're friends again. If you're friends with each other, you can get through anything. You can work on anything because you want to. And that is a truth, a biblical truth about marriage that we often so easily miss, that literally just hanging out together can make such a big difference. Okay, I think we should probably stop. One of the other secrets that we want to just sort of mention, probably, that it's the whole weekend. We talked about it mostly last night, that I loved, by the way, I should probably close with this, is that one of my favorite things that I would do when I would interview people, like randomly, that we would meet in coffee shops or on the plane or airports or whatever. And we had this little way of finding out, which sort of category of happiness people were in their marriage. And when I would ask these random couples who were so happy, I usually knew that I'd had 3 minutes with them. It's the person sitting next to me at the airport having hot dogs. I'm only going to get them for a minute or two, right? So what's your secret? What's your one most important thing that you'd want to tell people that leads to a happy marriage? How often they would look at each other and look at me and go, it's because of Jesus Christ. And you could tell that they were like, oh, this is a chance to witness to a social researcher. Like, this is so exciting. And yet, we talked about last night, putting God at the center of your marriage, it turns out, is one of the most important things that you can do statistically to have a happy marriage. And that's something that, like we said, every study has found. So, okay, we have a half an hour-ish break, and the first 10 minutes of the break, if you guys are okay with this, we want to do this survey. Now,
and we appreciate Pastor Jonathan and Sherry.
Yeah, we really appreciate you guys being willing to do this. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, the survey is on a sensitive topic of intimacy. And this is why, one of the reasons why we need to get real couples who are really willing to share anonymously. Everything is anonymous. We will not know who you are. Don't start taking the survey. I see it up on the screens. That's fine. But don't actually open it yet until I explain this. Everything is anonymous. We have paper versions of the survey as well. You can either go to that website or you can hold up your camera to that QR code and it'll take you to the survey. But wait just a minute.
Or you can do the paper survey.
Or you can do the
just
paper
raise
survey
your hand
in a minute. We will do that. Let me assure you, it is completely anonymous. We will not know who you are. There are some questions at the very end that we ask that we won't be able to identify you, but it will allow us to figure out which husband is married to which wife. In case you're wondering, like, why are they asking the first 3 numbers of our street address? Like, it's because we need to be able to know who is married to who so that we have this independent, anonymous survey. Now, we need to say right now, you're not going to be taking it sitting next to each other. And because we know that the temptation is going to be like, what are you saying? And so for those of you who are listening online and those of you who are here, first of all, if you are willing to participate, which we deeply need real people's honest results, the first thing we need you to do, especially if you're online, is to commit that you're not going to take it sitting next to each other, that you're going to be willing to move to the opposite ends of the sofa or the other side of the kitchen until you press submit and you're done, and then you can come back together. So if you're willing to participate, if you're not, and by the way, if you're not married, it's totally fine. You can look on your phones, you can look at the survey if you want to, feel free, or you can look at the news or go get coffee. But let me just ask, if you guys are willing to participate, can I have everybody stand up, and we're going to move you to opposite sides of the room, if you guys are okay with this. Everybody stand up, and I'm so sorry, because I know that this is a pain.
Yes, I sense, I feel for all the guys. I'm settled. I like where I'm sitting right now.
I promise you will come back to these spots, but everybody stand up. If we could have the men move to this side of the room, and if we could have the women move to this side of the room. If you are willing to take this survey, this will allow us to know that you are not looking at each other's.
And that's great.
If you are listening at home, if you are willing to help us with this research, this would be incredibly helpful, but we have to ask you to commit that you will not be near each other.
And so you know, the research that is
Okay, you can sit back down wherever you are.
And you can start, and I'll just talk for a little bit. The research that is out there is...
We have people who need paper.
Okay.
Who needs paper? Raise your hands, and Pastor Dwayne has people who are gonna.
They're gonna
bring it around.
Okay.
Who wants paper?
So.
And let me mention, if you get a paper survey, and we apologize to the people who are watching online, there is no way to get you a paper survey. I'm so sorry. So what you do is you go to this website, or you scan that QR code with your phone's camera. Open the camera and point it at it, and then follow the link to the survey. If you have a paper survey, Pastor Dwayne is still passing them around. If you have a paper survey, at the end of this survey, on the book table in the back, there is a blue bag that says surveys in big letters. Put your survey in there. We will never know what you said.
And just so you know, of the out there historically, the surveys that are available that married couples have done together anonymously on this topic, normally they're maybe 50 to 100 people. And this is stuff that is written up in academic journals and all sorts of things, and just a group of 50 or 100.
And that's it. And we're going to be doing 1,000 couples. That's our goal, is at all of our events this spring. We're going to be getting this input from people.
So what we're hoping is that this can be really transformational in our country, and it can gain acclaim and just helpful information to folks. So that's it. Thank you all. 10 minutes.
When you're done, it should take about 10 minutes. When you're done, just press submit and or turn in your survey, and we'll see you out in the lobby. And we will be back here at about 10:45.
Okay.
Hey everybody, we are going to be starting in just a couple of minutes again. I know some of you are just finishing your surveys. If you have paper surveys, remember to put them in the blue bags on the book table that say surveys. And otherwise, just make sure you press submit survey on your phone. We're going to start in about 2 minutes.
Okay, welcome back. Grateful for all of you that you participated in that survey. It really, I think, will help lots of folks over the coming years.
We, tonight, when we do the zippers and wallets session, we'll share a little bit of a sneak peek of what we're finding in the research already, because there's such interesting things that we just don't understand about each other. So anyway, okay, so this next session, I promised that we would be taking one of the topics from the first session, and blowing it up and examining it from a different perspective. And yes.
Before we start, can I just share? We know that we had scheduled to be done at 11:30. Maybe just if so that we can get some of the content in, it might go a couple minutes beyond then. But anyone who has to leave at 11:30, you will not offend us. You know, if you got to get up and go, you know, you have at it. But you know, and we won't try to go very much longer beyond
Just a
that.
few extra minutes if we need to finish a couple
if we
things.
have to.
And primarily, mostly, it'll probably be me talking in this session more.
Yeah, this research topic, I helped with the research, but Shaunti did all the writing, all of the analysis, and so I was a little more distant from this one than all the other ones.
So this topic, I want to tell you a story again, a story about something that happened. when we were trying to figure out what our next research project should be, this was probably in 2014, something like that. And something had happened. I'd seen a trend in some of my women's events that I did, because, Jeff and I do marriage conferences, but I also do a lot of women's events and speak at pastors' conferences. And early on, when we wrote for women only and for men only, the original books, the original editions of the books were published in 2004 and 2006. And we're not, like we said, we're not counselors, right? We're not pastors, we're not psychologists, we're social researchers. And so a lot of the normal questions that you get, like what we did last night, literally I would be like, give me a 2 years to do a study and I'll get back to you. Like, I don't know how to answer a lot of those questions. And one of the questions that I got over and over and over very early on was when a woman would raise her hand at a women's conference and she'd stand up and she'd say, look, I know you just spent this time helping me understand men, one of the things we'll be talking about tomorrow, helping me understand men, helping me understand my husband, and you say, that he needs to know that I appreciate him. He needs to know that I respect him. But what if I don't?
Ooh.
What if he's hurt me? What if there's some very real issues? What then? And at the beginning, I didn't know how to answer that question, other than, to some degree, these, can you fall out of love? Can you fall out of appreciation? Yes, but it's a choice to some degree. So those kinds of answers I could give biblically, but I kept hearing that the hurt and the heart behind that question. And so I started trying to figure out, what do you do? Like, what are some of the things that would make, the little things that would make a big difference in hurting relationships in those cases? And so I started to see that there were certain patterns that really did make a difference in that kind of circumstance, and started testing it a little bit, started doing a little bit more research. And then came, a day when I was at a church in Colorado, and a woman asked that same question, and she told me this story, and it was a very, very difficult situation. Their marriage was in serious jeopardy. They were almost divorced. They had been separated on and off. And her husband, I believe, had an addiction to pornography. And there was these several issues. And she was just done, like, emotionally. But she's like, but, we have 3 kids, and I don't want them to grow up in a broken home. What do I do? And so I gave her the initial stages of what I'm about to share with you in a minute, of something that I had been seeing might make a difference. We eventually called it the 30-day kindness challenge. That's sort of the label that we put on it, the 30-day kindness challenge. And I gave her this idea, and I said, try this, and I'm really praying for you. I hope that this makes a difference. And now, obviously, in all of these marriage conferences and women's conferences, I drop these bombs and then fly away. I usually shake up the snow globe, and then the pastors have to deal with it, right? Whatever comes next. Sorry. And yet, in this case, something really interesting happened. 3 years later, I was much further along in the research. We knew that this concept might end up becoming a book. We didn't know for sure. And then something happened where I was like, okay, this needs to be, this has to be the project that we tackle next. Where I was back in Colorado, different part of the state, doing another conference, and I got that kind of a question. What if I don't appreciate my husband? What if he's hurt me? Blah, blah, blah. And I now gave the answer much further along, more robust, more research behind it. And this woman nods and sits down, and another woman raises her hand. But she didn't have a question. She looked at the first woman and she said, if you will do what she just said, you'll find it changes everything. And she turned to me and she said, you won't remember me. But 3 years ago, you came to my church in a different part of the state, and I asked you a very similar question. and you gave me a very similar answer. And everything in me wanted to ignore everything you just said. But I didn't want my kids to grow up in a broken home either. And so I tried it. And she said, it changed everything. And she started to cry. And of course, I'm starting to cry. And she said, I had no idea until I started doing this how so many of our problems weren't because of him. They were because of me. And I didn't see it. How every day I was sabotaging my relationship and the marriage that I wanted. And so I started to do these things, and my mind started to change, and I started to see him become softer and him respond to me in certain ways. And that made it easier for me to respond to him in better ways. And it became this positive cycle. And she said, 3 years later, it's hard to believe I'm saying this, but 3 years later, we have an amazing marriage. And she said, it hasn't solved some of those big issues, like he's dealing with the pornography. It's not solved yet. But having become close again, it makes them easier to solve. And she said, and believe it or not, 3 years later, our marriage is so strong fundamentally that our church just asked us to become marriage mentors. Because they kind of, I think we're the couple that they point to and say, if they can do it, you can do it. and we started to figure this out, we're like, God, we have to dive into this. We have to understand what's going on here. We have to be able to quantify this and be able to share this with people. And so that is what led us, that's one of the things that led us to do this research project on the 30-day kindness challenge. And it ended up becoming this book, The Kindness Challenge, that deals with, in a more systematic way, what we were talking about earlier. Now, I want you to also know that what I'm about to share, and Jeff will chime in on from time to time in certain things, what we're about to share is what we actually originally intended this to be a marriage thing. And then as we started expanding the research, we realized that, whoa, this is actually a prescription that God uses to change any relationship, any difficult relationship in your life. I mean, like, literally, think about, your mother-in-law. Like, I don't know, you probably have great mother-in-law relationships, but, the colleague at work that drives you nuts, or, your teenage child that, you want to strangle every now and then, Any difficult relationship, some of these principles will really, really matter. So, big picture. Our surveys, our social research is all designed to dig out one thing, which is what is going to help you thrive the most in your lives and your relationships. That's it. Like, what are those little things that are going to help you thrive? And the common thread, when we go back and we look at all of our studies, and we're now starting study number 12? Is this 12th one?
I think so.
That they're participating in? I think it's number 12,
it is.
okay. When we go back and you look at all of those studies, they all have this one thread running underneath the surface, which is that whether you're thriving in your life, whether you're thriving in your relationships, it is far more correlated to how you treat other people than how you yourself are treated. Let me say that again. Whether you thrive statistically is far more related to how you treat others than how you are treated. It turns out that thriving is all about being kind. It is all about being kind. Now, if you want a better marriage, what we found, if you want a better marriage, be kind. If you want a better sex life, we actually studied that, be kind. If you want to be a better parent, have a better parenting relationship, be kind. Better leader at work, be kind. Like, literally, it is this miraculous thing that God has given us, this one fruit of the Spirit that has this supernatural power. And the impact of kindness, as you'll see in a minute as we go through this, the impact of kindness truly is supernatural. It is just as supernatural, just as miraculous, even though it's often unseen. It is just as miraculous as, the Israelites walking out into the desert and finding breakfast in the morning, right? Like, that's an obvious supernatural thing. There's manna on the ground that we pick up and we eat. And it's obvious and it's supernatural. The impact of kindness is just as miraculous as that. It is just as supernatural. It's just we don't see it that way. And we have to be able to see it that way. So here's the problem with this. Now we're gonna be talking about this 30-day kindness challenge. And we'll get into it in just a minute. Now, there's two caveats to this. There's two things that we have to recognize in order for this to work. First, for true Christ-like kindness to work, it means you have to be kind when you least want to be. Okay? That's sort of the first caveat. That's the first truth there that you have to know. The second thing that we have to know is that everybody in this room and everybody watching online, all of us think we are kind. I can guarantee you when I started talking about kindness, most of us in the room, because I've done this too, most of us in the room are going, oh, man, I really wish Jennifer were here. I really wish that Barry was here. Man, he needs to hear this. We think we are kind. Like, every single person values kindness, especially followers of Christ. It's just baked into our DNA. Here's the question for you. What was that woman in Colorado? What was the most important thing that she learned? That she wasn't as kind as she thought she was. We think we are kind, and we are deluded. We have no idea that we are not the people of Christ-like kindness that we think we are. We are completely blind. We care about it. Don't get me wrong. Everybody, I'm quite sure, 100% of the people listening to this care about kindness and care about being a kind person. And we are blind.
It's almost like, as I'm hearing you say this, it's almost like, you always hear in those 12-step programs, hi, I'm Jeff, I'm an alcoholic. The awareness, the humility that it takes to say something like that, yeah. It's almost like, hi, I'm Jeff, I'm not very kind. It feels like that, doesn't it?
It kind of does. That I am not as kind as I think I am is basically a better way of putting it. Because you may actually be kind. You may actually be an extremely kind person, except to your spouse or to your kids when they annoy you. Hypothetically, maybe one of us in here has that problem. And we don't realize that there's all these occasions where this person that we think we are and that we want to be goes away, and we just don't realize it. So we have to be able, in order for this to really work, we need a training ground. We need a boot camp to confront this sort of cheesy name, but kindness blindness, right? Like, we need to be able to have something that confronts us with the reality, and that we relearn some of the habits that we need to learn. And in the process, you'll see how this relates to that one habit of the happiest couples that we were talking about. So, to be a training ground, to become these people, I'm going to tell you what we eventually found after all of the years of the research and all of the testing and the surveys, what ended up being the most impactful process. So, if you want, by the way, you can actually look this up. I'm going to tell it to you so you can write it down, but you can also look it up at jointhekindnesschallenge.com. Jointhekindnesschallenge.com. And by the way, if you put up a slide, I wouldn't mind if you put up a slide on jointhekindnesschallenge.com. And it'll tell you these three things. In order to do this, you're going to do 3 things for 30 days. And this is the 30-day kindness challenge. The first thing that you're going to have to start with is you're going to pick one person to do this for. This might be your spouse, but maybe it is that you do have a difficult relationship with your teenage daughter right now, and you want to do this for her. I did this for my daughter when we were practicing this. She was 16. She's a great kid, but 16. And sometimes my head wanted to explode, so I ended up doing this for her. Why are you grinning?
No. I didn't have to do it for anyone in my world.
So you're going to pick one person. When you hear what it is, you're going to want to do this for a lot of people. Here's my first sort of instruction. If you want this to work, the first time you do it for one person. Because this is what God tends to use for us to become aware. Like, for some reason, the impact is just concentrated when we're doing it in the life of one person. And if we do it with multiple people at the first time, it's like a diluted kind of effort. So per first time, then you can do it for as many people as you want it to. First 30 days, here's what you're going to do. You're going to do 3 things, these same 3 things for 30 days. First, you're going to say nothing negative about that person. Nothing negative, either to them or about them to somebody else. Like, that's often where we sabotage ourselves, right? That's where we sabotage our relationships. Like, one of the things that's a pretty common thing that you sometimes will hear is, women kind of getting together and complaining about their husbands. And if I'm annoyed with something that Jeff has done, not that, and ever happens. Ever. But if I'm annoyed with something that he's done, and I can be polite to him, I cannot say anything negative to him. But if I go to my girlfriends who work with me, and I'm like, you would not believe what he did yesterday, I am sabotaging how I feel about him. And by the way, I'm training myself to be an unkind person. Like, I don't think of it that way, but that's exactly what I'm doing. So the first thing, nothing negative, nothing unkind, either to them or about them to somebody else. Second thing, every day for 30 days, is you find and you say at least one, but you just do one, something that you can praise, something you can affirm about that person. And you tell them, and you tell somebody else. So I can't get frustrated, I can't complain about something that Jeff did to my friends, but I'm looking for things to praise. And so I notice that, like, for example, he did something with our son, he needed to go to the doctor, and Jeff took him so that I could be on a work meeting or whatever. And I tell Jeff, thank you so much for doing that. And then the next day I go to my girlfriends and I say, you know what Jeff did yesterday? I had this big meeting, and instead of me taking the kids to the doctor, Jeff did. And he's just so thoughtful. And you're reinforcing those things, those good things to yourself as well. The third thing that you do every day for 30 days is that you do one small action of kindness, one small action of generosity for them every day. And
for that person.
For that person, that one person. And this, by the way, when we think of actions of kindness, our brain tends to go to, like the random acts of kindness movement, right? I know you've probably heard of that, where, you pay for the people in the drive-thru and the beat-up car behind you. Those things are great, but those are random acts of kindness. This is a targeted action of kindness for one person, and it doesn't have to be an act of service. An act of service is one type of kindness, but there's so many other ways that you can do an action of generosity. For example, for my 16-year-old daughter, when I was doing this for her, I realized it was really a common thing for her to come running into my office, and she would have something on her cell phone, some, YouTube video. TikTok didn't exist then, but at the time, if it had, it would have been TikTok. And she would come in with a little YouTube video. She's like, hey, Mom, watch this little video with me. And I hate to say this, but my tendency would be more like, in an hour, honey, I got to finish this blog that I'm writing. And I realized it's an action of generosity to pull my attention off of what I'm doing right then while she's excited about it and put my attention on her, rather than, okay, I'll get to you in an hour when I have time, right? That's just a little action. It took 3 minutes, but it meant something to her. So what we found is if you do those 3 things every day for 30 days, 89% of relationships improved. 89%. Now, for any of you who know statistics, that is huge. Like, you don't see numbers like that in social science. And yet, once we started actually looking at this, we realized it makes perfect sense that 89% of relationships would improve, because the biggest thing that's happening is of course you're improving the relationship, and you're sort of improving the kind of environment of the relationship. But the biggest thing that you're doing is you're completely changing you. It makes perfect sense that 89% of relationships would improve.
Can you share a story? And I know our time is of
Sure.
the essence, but about Henry.
Yeah. Okay, I will. Let me do that in this first one.
Okay.
Is that okay? So there's just a few principles. I'm just going to go through these really quickly. This is what you're going to see as you start to do this. And so these are some principles about how God has created kindness to work and why it's so supernatural. And this is something, once you start sort of exploring this for yourself, I really would urge you, in your own quiet time, in your time reading the Word, look up the scriptures on kindness. Look up some of the stories. And you'll see these principles about how God created kindness to impact you and impact other people in these really profound ways. Let me just mention a few of them, and you'll see that all of them add up to that topic that we talked about. Was one of the habits of the happiest couples, which is they've learned to boss their feelings around instead of letting their feelings boss them around. They've learned how to change their feelings and change their perspectives. So the first thing that you'll see when you do this 30-day kindness challenge, sort of the first principle of kindness, is that thoughts and actions of kindness, thinking kind thoughts and doing kind things, is going to change your feelings. It just will. One of the things that that Jeff was just talking about was a principle that you see over and over and over, where I had a study group of people who were testing the 30-day kindness challenge out very early on, before we did the big national test. And this woman came up to me, and she said, at our church, there was a group of people that were going through it, and she came up to me, she's like, look, I will do this 30-day kindness challenge. I know I need to. God's telling me I need to do this. But you don't know Henry. She kind of looked at me like that. You don't know Henry. And she said, look, I can, be polite and not say anything negative. I can do that part. I have no idea how I'm going to find the positive every day. I just don't. Like, it's just impossible. But I'll try it. And she said, so what I'm going to do, and she had a little notebook, a little bitty notebook with her. And she said, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry this notebook with me. And if I see anything that Henry does that's worth praising, I'm going to write it down. And so that if I see more than one thing every day, I'm going to bank it for the next day.
Because I'm certain
I ain't going to see things, okay? And so she's like, so just this is what I'm going to do, just so you know. And I'm going, okay. She comes up to me 2 weeks later at church, and she looks like a different human being. Her face, her countenance was so different. And she said, you would not believe what happened. I'm thinking, yeah, I would. And she said, day one, she's like, and she showed me her notebook. And she said, the first day, and it said, he mowed the lawn and he held the door for me at church. And she said, so I said, thank you for the door, and I was going to hold the lawn to the next day. And then she said, but look at day 2, and there were 5 things. And look at day 3, and there were 11 things. And she said, I had no idea. There were so many, many, many things every day that I just wasn't noticing. I just wasn't seeing. I was blind to those things. One of the principles of kindness is that what you focus on, and you don't realize this, one of the principles of how kindness works is that what you focus on is what you will see. And that is one of the things that allows us to be able to do Philippians 4:8. Okay? Philippians 4:8 is if you look at that passage in Philippians, you will see something that I had never noticed before, ever. I had never put this together. Philippians 4, actually, take down Philippians 4:8 for a minute and put up all of Philippians 4. Start with Philippians 4:1, if you don't mind. I think it's in 4:1 or 4:2. No, do 4:2. Hold on. There we go. Philippians 4:2 starts, the whole chapter starts with basically a backstory of these 2 women who were pillars of the first community church of Philippi. I don't know who these women are. They're the women's ministry director and the children's director. I don't know who they were. But they were these pillars of the church in Philippi, and they didn't get along. There was some personality conflict. There was something. Philippians 4, the entire context of this incredible chapter on rejoicing, for example, and looking at things that are excellent, worthy of praise, starts with a personality conflict. And Paul pleads with these 2 women to get along. And then he continues, if you look at the next verse, he's telling the church, please help these women get along. Apparently, God cares about relationships. What is his prescription for how to do this? What is his prescription for these 2 women coming together and the church helping them come together? It comes when he says, I think it's in the next verse, rejoice. I'm going to tell you again. Here's the answer. Rejoice. How do you rejoice in a difficult situation? How do you rejoice in a difficult marriage? How do you rejoice when somebody is absolutely driving you batty? How do you rejoice, frankly, Paul, when we're a persecuted church? Candidly, even bigger than that. Like, hello, dude, I don't know if you noticed, you're in prison, you're chained to a wall while you're writing this. And we're being thrown to the lions, thank you very much. How do you do this? And the answer comes in Philippians 4:8, where he says, here's how you do this. You think on whatever is lovely. You think on whatever is excellent. You think on those things that are good. You think on those things that are worthy of praise, rather than those things that are worthy of driving you crazy. Now, that prescription runs entirely through all of the scriptures on kindness. You'll see it over and over and over and over, that the supernatural power of kindness is activated by our choosing to think on those things that are worthy of praise.
Can
Go
I?
ahead. Yeah.
This works in relationships, husband and wife, and I think it also works in every one of your social media interactions.
It's true.
I have gotten off of Facebook and for some time now, just because it made me crazy. There are people that I liked in person, and I saw a different person,
On
on social
social
media. I really was tempted I never post, right? I just don't post, and I don't generally comment on things. But I was tempted in every one of these flaming kind of angry posts that a friend would put. I was tempted to just in the comments write Philippians 4:8 and nothing more. And gosh, I wonder what we would be in a society if we truly, truly just applied
it.
Philippians 4:8 to all of our interactions with people.
There is a powerful principle about how kindness works, the supernatural way that kindness works in our own lives, in our own feelings. And I'll give you an example of this, of how it changes. And every one of you have been in this situation. And it drives us crazy. And it's why we say actually kindness is sort of a superpower. I don't know if you guys are like superhero movie people. Our family is like a Marvel superhero family kind of. We love Marvel movies. And you have the superpowers. You always have the superhero that's bulletproof, right? And one of the things that we realized is that kindness actually makes you bulletproof emotionally. It changes your ability to get really agitated and upset. And Jeff was actually, remember the story you were talking about 400 about?
Oh yeah.
You've got to tell. This is a perfect example.
So when we first moved down to Atlanta, one of the very first churches that we visited, the pastor gave this sermon, and he started it off with recounting in the gospel where Jesus is saying, if anyone asks you to go with them a mile, go with them 2. If someone asks of you your coat, give him your cloak also. And so he held that. And then he said, let me tell you a story about a friend of mine. And he was saying that back in a couple of years ago, Georgia 400 was a kind of a newish highway that runs north out of Atlanta as the population centers were growing to the north so much. It was always in need of construction, always in need of widening lanes, making exits a little longer. And he said one particular time, this friend of ours was getting off at this one particular exit, and it was one that was still kind of needing to be lengthened. So what all the cars would do, it was just a part of the behavior, they would kind of pull off on the shoulder to make their way, because there wasn't an exit lane, a long enough exit lane. So it is not to block other traffic. They would pull off of the highway onto the shoulder and make their way up toward the exit.
In line. In order, take
very
their place.
Orderly. And he said, so my friend is doing that and gets up to where the exit really is starting, and a guy in a little red Corvette comes up really fast and jams the nose of his car, the hood of the car, in front of him. And he said, my friend
And he'd been waiting like 10 minutes.
Yeah, you know how that works. It's 10 minutes or whatever, and this guy comes, jams his car. And he said, my friend, with total premeditation, hits that little red Corvette into the side into the side. And he said, and I can totally tell you that I know this was a premeditated act, because my friend then proceeded to back up and hit him again. And when the guy in the Corvette calls the cops, all the people who were behind my friend, all the witnesses to what had happened said, we didn't see anything. And the cop didn't give him a ticket. And then the pastor said, now which of those 2 stories resonates with you most? Going that extra mile, or my friend taking vengeance upon this guy? And I went, oh man, I love the friend story. The Jesus one I don't really get, because I'm not very kind when it comes to people who are irritating me.
And so take this into an example that every single one of you have probably been in. Waiting in a line in traffic, or traffic zippering, merging, and there's always that person that speeds up to the end, skips the line, and tries to push their way in, okay? Now, what happens in your heart? Okay, you start just, steam comes out of your ears. You get so frustrated. If you're like me, unfortunately, I don't hit the car, but I'm getting up on the bumper of the car in front of me. I'm like, you ain't getting in here.
And for me, I justify it as all these other people have been waiting behind me. I would be doing them a disservice by allowing this person in here. I am protecting the democracy in America. It's up to me right now. Anarchy is about to reign if I don't do this.
And what happens in your heart? Are you peaceful? Are you calm? Are you happy? No, your head's exploding, right? You're agitated. You're stressed. That person in the car, the person who's being unkind, they are firing bullets and they're hitting. They're hitting you. You're stressed. You're agitated. Now, picture what happens when that person cuts in and you decide to be gracious and you back off and you wave them in, maybe with a little smile, and you decide, I'm just going to let them go ahead.
And it may not feel, you may not feel all warm and fuzzy necessarily.
You may not feel warm and fuzzy to them, but you decide to let them in. And you aren't going to, sort of hold it over them or jam up on the car in front of you. Now what happens to your feelings? It's like you feel that weight rise off your shoulders, right? All that agitation, you don't feel that anymore. What has just happened? Your kindness has made you bulletproof. That person is still firing the bullets, but they're not hitting. They're bouncing off. All of that agitation and stress is just kind of dissipated. It doesn't mean you aren't annoyed or whatever, but you have just sort of experienced in that example, you have just experienced the truth about kindness having supernatural power to change your feelings. That's an example of when you apply that in marriage. It is easy to, in marriage, jam up on the car in front of you, so to speak.
And stand on your rights.
Stand on your rights, and I'm going to... And it makes us agitated and upset. And when we treat the other person with undeserved kindness, here's the supernatural thing that happens. It's the same thing. One of the superpowers of kindness that we have seen over and over in many, many relationships during the study, and you've probably seen many examples of it too in your lives and the lives of the people you love, is that kindness, whether it's a difficult colleague at work or your child or in-laws that you don't like very much or somebody who's always on your case, undeserved Christ-like kindness. People talk about it bringing down walls. There's a lot of people who have sort of the castle wall around them and you can't get to them. And what we found actually is that kindness doesn't tear down the walls. It melts through them. It melts through to the person's heart behind that wall and makes this huge, huge difference. So you'll find this principle. We've talked about the fact that thoughts and actions of kindness are going to change your feelings. You've seen the principle that what you focus on is what you will see, right? We've talked about the fact that these actions are going to lift the blindness that you have, and this is probably where we should end, that as you take these steps of kindness to try to be the kind person that God has called you to be, that kindness blindness suddenly falls away. And you see all the ways that you are not as kind as you think you are. And let me tell you, we found, we don't have time to get into it, we put it in the book, but we found that there are actually 7 distinct patterns of unkindness, patterns of negativity, etc., that each of us tend to have at least one of these 7. Some of us have many more than one. I would be one of those.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example of my type of unkindness. I'll just be really transparent. When I first started looking at this, I thought, I'm really not an unkind, negative person. Like, I feel like I'm a glass half full kind of girl. I feel like I try to treat people well. And then once I started doing the 30-day kindness challenge for my daughter, I realized I am unkind and negative every single day. Because for me, my pattern of unkindness and negativity is exasperation. That's one of the 7. I get exasperated with my kids all the time. And I don't realize, like, our son has some learning issues, and like he would, work for hours with Jeff on a science project and then forget to turn it in. And it just like, and I would say, buddy, come on, you worked on that. And this is another example of you're not paying attention. And my voice is rising and I've got that tone. I don't realize that what I'm saying to my sweet, sensitive son with that tone of voice is, you're an idiot. Would I ever use those words? I would never use those words with my son. And yet that's exactly what I'm saying with that exasperation and irritation. That's my pattern of unkindness. And because I'm blind to it, it takes something like the 30-day kindness challenge to open my eyes.
One of the other identifying things of unkindness is something that I'm actually really skilled at, sarcasm. I'm pretty good at doling that out. And unfortunately, this doesn't mean that you can't joke with one another and poke at one another,
Well,
correct?
do you want me to explain
Yes.
that? Everybody loves joking, but one of the patterns of unkindness is sarcasm, and it turns out that if everybody listening to you knows that you have 100% goodwill towards this other person, unconditional love, unconditional care for this person, then it's just funny, right? But if anybody listening, including the person you're being sarcastic to, has any question about that, then there's a little seed. When they hear it, they're laughing, ha ha ha, and then they kind of internally are going, did he mean that? Does he really feel that way? Like, there's a little bit of truth behind every joke. Is that what he thinks of me? And they start to put up a bit of a wall. And then it gets higher and higher over time. And so that's why sarcasm sometimes is one of the patterns of negativity.
Can you, in closing,
Yeah.
Can you share one story? The story of, I guess it was with the AT&T customer service.
Oh, Jeff.
Yeah,
you
I
are
love
so
this.
mean.
It's a great story.
Okay.
And since it doesn't affect me, I'm going to ask it.
Okay. This is one of the principles, by the way, that once you see this, that you do have this unkindness in your heart, once you recognize what your pattern is, or patterns, you'll see them everywhere. Like, I did the 30-day kindness challenge for my teenage daughter, realized that for me, exasperation and irritation is my pattern, and I start to see it all these other places that I've been blind to before. Classic example, which Jeff loves, is I was on one of those calls, those calls with like customer service people where it should take 5 minutes and you're still on the phone an hour later? You know what I'm talking about, right? It drives me batty to have to be passed around.
And particularly when you have something that
I had someplace I had to be.
And you were on our landline.
Yes, and I'm on a landline. I couldn't just go on a cell phone and leave. I'm stuck to a landline and trying to finish, and these people didn't know what they were doing, and I'm having to repeat myself 5 different times, and I finally get to the final customer service rep, who's a very sweet lady, but she has to ask me all the security questions again and the whole thing again. And I'm going, yes, no, I'm sorry I'm being frustrated, but I've been on the phone for an hour now. And she's like, I understand. Like, she was so sweet, but she was so slow, right? I understand. She's like, okay, well, give me a minute. I'm like, I never got a minute. And finally she solves it. She solves whatever the issue was. And she said, have we resolved everything to your satisfaction?
And you're looking at your watch.
Mrs. Feldhahn. And I'm like, yes, you have. Thank you very much. And she said, Thank you for allowing us to serve you. And oh, by the way, I loved your book. Picture me rocking in a corner with my thumb in my mouth. Like, I was so embarrassed, like mortified. And then I realized I'm mortified for the wrong reason. I'm mortified because this person probably had some idea in her head of who I was as an author, and I blew that idea out of the water, right? And then I realized I should be mortified because I am supposed to be an ambassador of Jesus Christ in every interaction in life. I am supposed to be sharing his love and looking like him in every circumstance, no matter how frustrating. And that's what the world needs to see. And that's, to me, why I feel like God called us to this particular project, is to help his people overcome the blindness. We want to be kind. We just don't realize that, especially sometimes with our most important relationships, we just aren't as much as we think we are. And yet, this is an opportunity for us to actually learn that and become those people. I want Jeff to share a story that sort of ties into how powerful this can be if we become these people. But I do want to encourage you, if you're interested in this, go to that jointhekindnesschallenge.com website. There's actually an assessment that you can take if you're brave. That'll help you understand. It's called the Find Your Kindness Quotient, and it'll help you understand where you're starting. And sort of in some cases, where you may be doing great, and in other areas you may need some work. And it'll help you understand where you're starting. And there's also a place you can sign up if you're interested in doing the 30-day kindness challenge and getting some reminder emails every day with a little bit of coaching to help you along.
So the Las Vegas?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do this real quick.
Can you, I feel like this is an example.
So
Can I just?
A church that we used to go and speak at, several times we'd been there, it was Central Christian Church in Las Vegas. And it was a church that had grown from around 1,000 kind of congregants to 20,000. And there's a young pastor who was kind of over that kind of growth. And he had a principle, these principles of what he said, how we would operate as a church.
And I should explain, and the reason why we're mentioning this in this conclusion about this topic on kindness, almost all, not 100%, but almost all of his growth in that church were baptisms, new conversions.
Not people going from other churches. And the fact is, he said, look, here in Las Vegas, we have a population that is really, really unchurched. I mean, they don't have even the basics of knowledge of Christianity, for many. They just have no exposure at all. So when they come into our church, they're coming in pretty raw with no kind of background of how they should behave. So we have a lot of people in our congregation who are active in the entertainment industry and other things, living together, all of these sorts of things. And he said, our principles are, we do three things. This is what we ask of our church, that first you belong, then you believe, then you behave. We have it in that order.
He found that that's the principle that God had given him.
God had given to him.
You can't expect people to behave first.
So oftentimes we want people to believe and behave, or behave first, and then you can believe, and then you get to belong. So they were all about belong. Become part of our body. We will love you, engage with you wherever you are starting at.
Be kind to you.
We will be kind. And so anyways, he said that's been our kind of mission as a church. And we have lots of people in varying stages of that. He said, for example, we always have a lot of college interns who are seminarian interns, and they come and they spend the summer here, and they kind of work with a pastor, and they learn the world of pastoring. And he said, at the end of the summer, because we have so many entertainers in the church, oftentimes we'll treat the interns, to a show that one of the members is part of. And, they get to go backstage and all of those sorts of fun little perks. And he said, one of our members of the church was a comedian. And he's great. He does this one-man show. And so Pastor Chris took his intern, and they went to see the one-man show. And then afterwards, they were going to meet backstage and kind of see what goes on and all of that stuff. So all of that happened. And as they are backstage, now, I should say, in these theater venues in Las Vegas, one show finishes and another show begins, and they may not have anything similar to do. Even though his is a comedy act, the next show doesn't have to be a comedy act.
It could be a magician.
It could be
it could
anything.
Be a
so
singer.
He said, so we are standing backstage, and then all of a sudden the door opens, and in prance, these 20 tall, blonde, topless women in a line. And they're kind of coming on for the next show.
Topless dancers.
Topless dancers. And he said, so we're all kind of standing there, looking down at our shoes. And then we hear, Pastor Chris! And one of the dancers peels off and comes over and goes, your message last week was so amazing. Gives him a hug and says, thank you so much. It really just impacted me so much. And, I got to go, sorry. And we're all standing there and this intern's like, this is the greatest job ever. But what was happening was this person had been in this church, had heard. Now, she's
impacted
somewhere
by the kindness of this
kindness of this church. She's not yet in the behavior area that most of us would necessarily be comfortable with, but she's on a journey.
Well, do you remember how he ended that story?
Go ahead.
Do you remember?
I don't.
He said, this is an example of the kind of thing that happens over and over and over. Is about 6 months later, this woman comes to him and says, Pastor, I just am feeling really uneasy about my job. Do you think I should change jobs? That might be a good idea. Let's talk about that. And he said they have found that the Holy Spirit, it is the kindness of God that leads us to repentance. I forget what scripture that is. It's the kindness
Romans.
of Romans.
It's Romans 12.
It's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance. And that's really sort of the encouragement for you guys, is that
we can do this.
We can do this. And imagine the body of Christ if it's multiplied by what we learn in our spouses and doing this with our spouses and our kids and our colleagues and our in-laws and the people outside our immediate relationships. Imagine the impact of this multiplied across true Christ-like kindness in our culture.
Amen.
So,
thank you.
thank you guys.
Sorry we went a little long.
We went a little long. Sorry about that.
Wow, this has been fantastic. Amen. Should we give an altar call? Amen. Amen. Tonight's session begins at 6 p.m. I hope you'll be here, and God bless you.